may wonder why this young face happens to have known Ernest Holmes, and I will tell you about that, because it's only the face that's young. The body is getting there, although in religious science we're not supposed to admit that. I do. I do, because I'm in my 80th year, and I'll be 80 next February, so I have a right to brag. Okay. My story begins with my father. His name was Reginald C, known as Reggie in his youth. And he, when he was 12 years old, he came out to California to live in Venice with his mother, brother, and sister. And nearby there was a park, and the man that ran or was in the park, he was the umpire of the baseball team for the city of Venice, and that was Ernest Holmes. So at 12 years old, my dad met Ernest Holmes. And Ernest lived right there in Venice, and the two of them walked to and from home to the park together, and they became very well acquainted, and they were like this for the rest of their lives. And that includes, even though Ernest passed away in 1960, and my dad in 1977, Ernest still was a prominent person in his life. All right, so let's get, I remember now to turn pages. So now I'm going to begin. All right, and so then we lived next door to Ernest for some time. My dad lived there before he married my mother. I was 8 years old when they got married, and so we lived next door, kind of next door. Their property was behind ours. Their front went on this street down here. You had to drive up this street, and there was our house, and we walked through our property to get to their property. It was open. We used it all the time to go to school. They were over at our house a lot. We were over at their house a lot. Any parties, barbecues, it was a constant kind of thing. Okay? And then my father worked with Ernest when he grew up. Well, as a teenager even. He would go to lectures, Ernest lectures when he would travel. And Ernest would have a tutor that so Reggie would keep up with his school studies. All right, so let's see here. This is a picture of Ernest's mother and father. His father was William, and he was a farmer, and I believe his family, at least the Holmes family, was from Nova Scotia, Canada. This is in Lincoln, Maine. The farm that they lived on was in outside of Lincoln, Maine. His mother, Anna, was a school teacher. They, sometime soon, I know it was soon, because they had 9 boys. Now there were only 8 there. The oldest, the first one, passed away as a child before Ernest was born. And I'm sure you can see which one Ernest is, because the arrow is sitting on him. And I have an arrow, well, I'm not going to even follow. You can see yourself, the names are listed there. So Ernest is the third from the side. Fenwick is the other person you've probably heard of, Fenwick Holmes. He went to seminary and was a minister. And he is the third from the right side. The next to him on this side is Jerome. He also was a minister. And these are congregational ministers. Jerome, his main ministry was in Hawaii. His family there's still family there in Hawaii. They're related to Jerome. And I said that the first son died before Ernest was born. So that makes 9 boys. And Anna lived to be 99 years old. You can believe that after raising all those boys. Yeah, challenging, she knew how to do it, I guess. This is just a look at the kinds of questions that when you passed the 8th grade in 1895, these are kind of the questions that you had to know. And I think this is the best picture I've ever seen of it. I guess most of the rooms aren't this good because you can read it. And how many there think they could pass the test? Yes, or correct answers to all of those questions. I don't think, probably, well, maybe somebody did. At any rate, the reason I have this up here is because Ernest finished the 8th grade, but from there on, he didn't have any more formal education. He went to what they had academies for different subjects, and he went to an academy for a short time, but his brother Fenwick was very sincere in becoming a minister. He was older, and he knew he wanted to be a minister. So he went to the academy and the seminary, and Ernest felt that the money spent to go to the academy, because they didn't have to pay for it, should be better spent on Fenwick rather than him, because he just had no interest in the subjects that they wanted to teach him. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. I'm sorry that is not as clear as I would like it, but that's the title of the book by Ernest Holmes. I have that book. It's the original, and inside cover in Ernest handwriting it says, "Emerson is a friend, a present I give myself." And so I treasure that, and as he treasured Emerson and Emerson's teaching. He met Emerson's writings, not the man, of course, but the writings, when he was about 18. He was a teenager. These are pictures of Ernest when, as you can see, different times in his life. The one appears to be a program. He went to, he had training for Chautauqua circuit, and that's to learn to read poetry, do dramatizations on, to audiences. We still have those Shakespearean festivals in that round, and that's the kind of thing that he would do. And this is what he looked like in 1920. Now, the Chautauqua circuit taught him how to speak and homiletics and all that. And so he was a great, wonderful speaker. If you ever, well, you didn't see him, but we do have one kinescope of him speaking and to no audience. That's the sad part, because he looks different when he's speaking to an audience than when he's speaking to a camera. So he only did a very few presentations on television. Because of that, he did not like speaking to a camera. And he couldn't see the people. And I don't blame him, because I've had some experience of that recently, and it's very difficult when you don't have that feedback from the audience, like your head shaking. At any rate, during this time in Chautauqua, he learned from Powers is the last name.
Not Tyrone.
Pardon me?
Not Tyrone.
No. Powers is the last name, and I'll think of it in a minute. But he was a teacher, and he had the class for the. Now I have to get my notes out. I'm sorry. I've never forgotten that, but I have now. Leland Power School of Elocution. Sorry, thank you. That's where he was attending, and that's how he got a Chautauqua circuit. And Leland Powers was, his wife was a reader for the Christian Science Mother Church there in Boston. I'm getting ahead of myself. When Ernest, when he was about 18, he moved to Boston and lived with his family, with cousins and uncles, and they had a store. And that's where he learned to be a butcher. He learned how to cut meat and be a butcher. In his off hours, he would spend his time in the public library. And that's how he got his education. He read all the Bibles and the wisdom books and all the authors that they had there in the Boston Library. Also, then he wanted to learn all about Christian Science. The Mother Church was right there. Don't know that he ever attended, but what he did do, since Leland Powers' wife was a reader, and he had a daughter, Ernest would take the daughter to shop where they could get malts and sodas, and he would ply her, my father told me, he would ply her all afternoon with these sodas so that she would tell him all about Christian Science. Supposedly that's how he learned what Christian Science was all about. He was a very, very curious person from very, very small. I understand his mother, some people call him question mark, when he was about 2. And as he grew up, he was always, throughout his whole life, he was extremely curious about everything. Then he moved to Fenwick, was not well, and so Fenwick moved to California for his health. Unfortunately, he moved to Pomona, California, and the air in Pomona, that's East Los Angeles, is not all that great, I guess, even in those days. So his mother had gone out there to stay with him, and they moved to Venice, which is at the ocean. And then Ernest went there to visit on vacation, and he liked it so much then that he moved out there. That's when he became, he got very involved with Fenwick, was the minister in the Congregational Church, in a small Congregational Church there in Venice. And Ernest would have a Boy Scout troop meeting down in the basement of the church. They got very involved with politics of the Venice area, and tried to get rid of wrestling, I think it was, in the city. Wrestling was very popular, at that time. This here picture is on the beach of Venice, and as you can see, the top left is Ernest, next to him is Fenwick, next to him is Reggie, about 15 years old, and next to him is Ann Gaylor, daughter of Agnes. And you see below, you all know who Nona Brooks is, founder of Divine Science. I'm assuming that you come from church, Science Mind churches, and you've had some classes, and so you've heard of these people. Divine Science and Unity and such. Letitia Andrews, at that time, I guess she was very well known in Oakland, California, as a metaphysical leader. But Ernest loved people and he loved parties. And you'll see in a minute, there were parties all the time in that area.
Is that a religious like symbol on their shirts?
Oh, wow.
No, that's a V.
Oh,
No, in 1927, Ernest married Hazel Holmes, and this is what she looked like in 1920s, 30s, and 30s. She had studied, she went to school in Los Angeles, and she had some very well-known classmates, such as Adela Rogers St. John's, who was a very well-known journalist, and her father was a well-known attorney. Betty Woods was Robert Stack's mother, and I think Paul Williams said that he also went to school with them. She studied after basic school, then she went and studied opera, and she traveled extensively. She was never on the stage because she didn't like being out there in front. But she did study and sang. And through those connections, she knew a lot of celebrities in the Hollywood area, as well as an aunt. I don't know if that's next. No, Aunt Gussie will come soon. This is just a picture of Ernest and Hazel and their dog Prince. And that's in their yard right behind us. The thing that separated their yard from ours was a wall of cactus. There's a better picture of it. But it's a wall, and there's just big, very tall cactus plants. And that was in that area of Palms. Palms is just east of Venice. Another picture of Ernest and Hazel, and this is Lena. This is their housekeeper. She was with them. She didn't live there, but she was there every day. And she was with them from the 1940s, because they moved from that house in 1949. And we know that she was there then because we remember her there then. And she was then with Ernest until he passed on in 1960. That was a long relationship that they had. Hazel passed on in 1957. Here's a picture of Ernest and his mother. She did a lot of work for the soldiers during World War I and II. Knitting and that kind of thing. Knitting socks. They did a lot of knitting socks. There's Aunt Gussie. She is a sister to Hazel's mother. And she was what they called a club lady. She was a celebrity. She was a real estate broker. And she helped, she loved Science of Mind and Ernest and all that, and she loved parties. So she was always available for all the parties of the celebrities in Hollywood and all that kind of thing. And she is the person that later on in 1935, when they were looking for another place for their home office to be, something that they could purchase and have that as their main home office after Science of Mind was started and all that. She's the one that found the building where the Institute finally stayed there for many, many years. This is in 1941. That would have been just about the beginning of our participation in the war, World War II. And Frank Robinson approached Ernest and wanted him to be a part of his group of people. And this is a rally at the Philharmonic Auditorium, which is the largest auditorium in the Los Angeles area. As you can see, that's Ernest on the left, and Robinson is on the right. And it's interesting, when I was reading all the minutes to prepare the Chronicle of the History of Religious Science, the board of directors of the Institute decided that this was not an organization that they wanted Ernest to participate in. So he evidently did this before they made that decision, and because Robinson wanted the two to be, like partners kind of thing. And the board of the Institute said, we don't think that's a good idea. So Ernest did not do anything else with them. I have this on here because it's like you can see, a 2,000-seat auditorium to be at the corner of 6th and Berendo. Founders Church was built in 1958, opened in 1960 on this corner. Yes, on this corner, 6th and Berendo. And it's a round church. But I want you to see this. This is clear back in 1946. This was a rendition of an idea of a pretty round church. That was Ernest's idea, that if they were going to have a church, he wanted a round one. So I find it interesting that way back, what is that, 20 years before, or 14 years before, they had the same idea. The building on the left there is what the Institute building looked like. You'll see a picture of it in a few minutes. This was like their first home office. It was on Wilshire Boulevard, and they were there until 1935. I think they were in the, they started in 1927 is when they were incorporated. And I think they were in that building at that time. Ernest was always writing, constantly writing, reading. And there was a woman that was around the Institute a lot, and she worked for Jose Cardozo, greeting card company, and she wanted Ernest to give her some of his poetry. and to have greeting cards made. So in the archives, we have all of those greeting cards. They're beautiful on parchment paper, and they're just about for any occasion you can think of, particularly Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, home baby showers, housewarmings, just about anything. This particular one I chose because I think it's interesting that they have this piece of music in there, and you can actually play that music. The words are by Ernest Holmes, and then that's Janice Crawford was a popular a pianist for Ernest. We have all of those in the archives, and we're considering perhaps making some duplications of them. They're so beautiful. I don't know if they would sell well. They're a product of many years ago, and whether they would be popular like that now, I don't know. So that's a decision we have to think about. The original 1926 Science My textbook, you all heard of it, I'm sure. Maybe some of you have a copy, and that's just a facsimile of what it looked like. This is the first religious science magazine, which I think it was about 14 months later became the Science of Mind magazine. And notice it says a magazine of Christian philosophy. And so this was October 1927 was the first edition, and I think it was must have been January 29th was the first Science of Mind, probably. Not positive. Yeah, that would make it 14 months later. I think that's what it is. At any rate, the other Creative Thought magazine, that wasn't created until 1950s. About 54, 55 is when it first came out. So this is a copy of the first magazine. And this is where the Institute of Religious Science and School of Philosophy was in. They moved in there in 1935. And like I said, my pointer isn't there, but later it was called the Three Arches because it was, some people went in and remodeled and things. But the first tall part that's all the foyer. Then the first trees there, about the second window, is where my dad's office was. And then his secretary and Hazel and Ernest, their offices are right straight down there on the first floor. Upstairs, we had a big auditorium where they taught classes. And the Science of Mind magazine was in there. I think just about everything. It was a beautiful building that had been owned by an interior designer. And so all of the rooms, when you walked in, they had this big foyer, which was very beautiful. But then there's this big, long hall, and on each side were offices. And so, as I just pointed out, on this side were those offices. On the other side, they had practitioners who had offices and maintained offices during the week, and that was where they had their clients come in. But every room was decorated in a different style. And one might be French provincial, one might be, I don't know, Italian, just different styles. My father's office was very small, but when Gussie, as I told you, she's the one that found the building as being available. So the three of them, Ernest, Reg, and Gussie, all walked into this building to take a look at it, see if they wanted to buy it. And that was what they did. Gussie said her office was right there in front. And then Ernest found this little one. It had green marble fireplace in it, and beautiful wood paneling all over. It was gorgeous, but very tiny. But that's, it was big enough for a desk and a couple of chairs for people to sit in. And those chairs are also in the archives. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to tell you? Pardon me?
Is this building still standing?
Unfortunately, it's a very old building. And we eventually we owned the property in the back, property going down there and on the other side, almost the whole square block between 6th and 5th Street. And this is New Hampshire, and the other street is Brendo. So in the other corner became Founders Church. This building in the 1980s, they were having a lot of problems with water and drainage and things because there was a natural stream that ran across down from Vermont Street down underground, right along the back of the building. And very often flooded the downstairs basement where they had the kitchen and some offices and the fiesta room, which was where they had parties and the youth would meet and things like that. So in the 1980s, it was decided to go into a partnership with some construction company, and they tore it down, unfortunately. Founders Minister Arthur Chang has been smart, and he's gotten the Brendo Founders marked as a historical site, so they can't do that. But for this building, they just decided that, we'll tear it down. It was very heartbreaking for many of us who, as a kid, playing around in there, But anyway, so the partnership built a new building. You'll see a picture of it and stuff. And then in back, they built apartment buildings all the way to 5th Street. And it was not profitable for, this was United Church, it was not profitable for them. And they finally had to just give it up, everything up. And that's when they moved to Burbank. Ernest and Hazel were very well known in Hollywood. And so I just a picture to show you Jack Bailey, if any of you remember him. He was a very well-known actor, and he also was the host of the Queen for a Day show way back then. And Ernest, and then Don Feddersen and Jim Morgan. Cecil B. DeMille, and the tall man behind is Donald Curtis. He was one of the religious science ministers, and he was also a unity minister. And he had a church in Santa Barbara, which I remember attending that one. And then he went to Unity in Texas, and he had a church there. Then he came back to Southern California, and we do have some of his things in the archives too. I collect as much as I can for the archives. And there's Peggy Lee. She was very dear friends, or Ernest and Hazel were dear friends to her. And she called on them a whole lot for prayer work, and used them as her practitioner. And if any of you have ever seen her autobiography, she mentions Ernest and Hazel a whole lot in her autobiography. One of my favorite pictures of Ernest. Just because I like it, that's why it's there. That's the Ernest I remember. Right, this is our backyard, and Ernest is there. He loved to cook. Ever since he had become a butcher, he loved to make stews and chili, and he taught my mother how to make those things, and custard. Those are the three things my mother said that he taught her how to make. The other person, I think, is Reg, and over there preparing hamburgers. And the picture on the left is, there's some kids. We had these great big huge mats, and they would put that on the ground, and then the kids would sit around there. And you see those trees there behind? That's the fence between Ernest and Hazel and our property. These are pictures of Ernest and Hazel and Reg and Elsie, my mother. And I think it's probably in the 40s because he has pure black hair and he looks pretty young. And he was about 40 when he married my mother, and my mother was, I think, 28, because it was 12 years difference between their ages. And then this picture here They were celebrating 14 years to be together on the platform. So that probably started in at Wilton Theater, and then they moved that congregation to Founders Church when it was built in 1960. So Louise on the left is Bill Hornaday's wife, and then Bill Hornaday, he's the founding minister, he's the minister of Founders Church, and he was the senior minister. He's the one that built, had built. Ernest was never the minister there. He did speak there, and I was a minister. Reg, when they first opened the first Sunday in January 1960, Reg would give an early service, and that's what he continued to do for most of his life. He would talk about the Bible and do the meditation service. And then Ernest would come on for the next service, like about 9, and then the 11 o'clock service was Bill Hornaday. That lasted for about 6 weeks, and Ernest then wasn't feeling well, and so in March he had a stroke, and then he passed on April 7th, I believe it was. He died in his home. This is just a graduating class, and you may have known or recognized some of those names. Clarence Mayer was a well-known practitioner, and I guess he became a minister. Earl Barnum was in Redondo Beach. Carmelita Trowbridge started the Alhambra, California church. Jack Faustinus, I'm not sure. Robert Bitzer was the founder of the Hollywood church. Arian Lewis was an attorney. Charles Parker was in Laguna, down in that area, Basalt, California. And then the front row is Ernest and Bill Hornaday. Irma Glenn is a world-renowned organist, which I never knew that until I had a call from someone asking me for information about her and her relationship with the church. And he said she was known all over the world as a great organist. And I wasn't able to help him because I didn't know any of that about her. Bill Hoy was the president at the time. Laura Holman, she started the Glendale Church. Henry McLean, Gussie Rundle, of course, and Mabel Kinney. Mabel was the president of the Women's Club there at the Institute, and also she was the president of the, I guess it'd be, Republican Women's Organization. This, I believe, is about the 1940s from the looks of Reg. That's about all I can go with. And he has, because he has black hair. And it later turned to a beautiful silver color. The woman on to his right there is Adele Chadwick, who's a cousin of Ernest. And she later moved to Florida and lived to be 103 years old, I understand. And then next to her is Clarence Mayer. And I can't name any of the other people. But I believe those are the staff of the Institute at that time. Ernest enjoying the youth playing music. The youth will always ask me, they never had any children. Did they like children? I said, yes, but they were too old when they got married. I think Ernest was 40, and Hazel must have been 43. She was 3 years older than he was, and that was 1927. And women didn't have babies when they were that old, generally speaking, in that time. The lady down in the front where the arrow is, that's Adela Rogers St. John's. I mentioned her earlier. Her grandson, George St. John's, later became the interim COO of the United Church Organization, and he was the editor of publisher of the magazine, I think. Head of communications, did all kinds of things for a little while. there. Right now, if any of you have heard of the Heflin Foundation, he is the president of the foundation. I'm the secretary of that foundation, and it was created 20 years ago this year by Marion Heflin. Her husband was John Heflin, who was a well-known minister at that time, and he started 3 different churches, or he was involved with 3 different churches in Southern California. The man down there in the front, which you can't see very well, that's Norman Lundy, and Ernest sent him to Florida to start churches in Florida, which there are many churches in Florida. And he started in Miami, Fort Lauderdale. His daughter is still in Boca Raton, Barbara Lundy. She's going to send me her father and mother papers and library for the archives. I ask these people because these are the leadership of our history. And I want Barbara's too. I want the ministers of today's things too. But we've got to work fast in getting some of these other ministers that are no longer living. Because then when those kids pass on, they don't know what to do with this stuff and they just get rid of it. So I say, send it to us first. Just pick an audience, and then he would turn that audience over to someone who had had his classwork. Say, here, take over, build what you will. Well, in just a few months after Richard came, Ernest decided to retire from the pulpit. And so he was 56, he turned the congregation over, the audience, over to Gina Clark, who was a practice minister. He had been in charge of the education at the Institute. That would be for the whole church. And church organization, I should say. And so Gina Clark then became a minister. He started the Beverly Hills Church. Richard stayed on with him for 26 years after that. He's still living in Cathedral City. At least I saw him a year or so ago. He's written a lot of music. He told me last time I saw him he had written like 200 songs. He lived in Hollywood, and so he had written a lot of music. This appears to me to be a youth meeting, and the reason it appears that way is because a couple of young people there, and the fellow on the left there in front was, he was a youth director, youth leader, and he became my husband some 30 years later. But I knew him at this time, that was in the 50s, but that he was in his 20s and just got out of the service. He was in the Naval Air or something. Party time. Down as you can see, Ernest has this twinkling personality and a very mischievous kind of look about him. There's another one of him, and that was interesting. I saw lightning. I think that's probably a church picnic. I do remember a few church picnics that we went to from in Los Angeles. This was the last home that he and Hazel lived in. It was purchased by the church in 1950, I think it was 54, on the corner of Lorraine and 6th Street. And it was purchased for them to live in for the rest of their lives. Hazel died shortly thereafter, and then Ernest stayed there alone until he passed on in 1960. So that would be about three or 4 years. And funny story, I'd like to tell you that you can see there are flowers around there. Other than that, it's just greenery. And my sister told me a story. This book I wrote here, in his company, is a book of people telling me stories and their memories of Ernest. And but I had not talked to my sister about this particular story. And what she said was that when Ernest was alone, he was very lonely. He missed Hazel greatly. And so my sister and her husband, every once in a while, would go over and see him. They lived in Southern California. I didn't live there at that time. And And Ernest would call them and say, would you come help me move furniture or whatever it was he wanted done. So one day he called and he said, you know, Dorothy, I'm having this I don't know, it was a wedding or a party or something. And he said, and the grounds are so dull. There is no color at all. So he said, would you come over? I'm going to go and buy some flowers. Would you come and put them in the yard? And so they came over, and Ernest had gone and bought all these cut flowers, and they stuck them all over to make it pretty. Isn't that ingenious? Okay. All right. This house later, just a few years ago, was up for sale, and it was sold for, I think it was like $3.6 million or something. But at the time when it was purchased, it was around, I think, $60,000, right around in there. And if we had the money, which I know somebody who would love to do this, and then is to purchase that house and have it become the archives. He said it's Ernest's house. Ernest things belong in Ernest's house. And so he would love to do that, but the people bought it too quickly that time. And so now it's just a question of the people there, are they ever going to sell it? And for how much? And who's going to put up the money to get it? Good question. This is the interior of the house. In contemplation, he smoked his cigars. One time he smoked pipes, but then he gave those up, and then he just smoked cigars. He didn't smoke cigarettes, he did not drink, he didn't like the taste or the feeling that he would, you know, he didn't like wine because it made him feel funny. His digestion, which I'm sure it does to a lot of us. And this is Ernest working with Fenwick, and we believe he is probably writing The Voice Celestial, because that's the only book that he wrote with his brother. And that's, so we are presuming that. When he lived in Oakland, Fenwick lived in Oakland, and it appears to be you know, like a motor home kind of home, or fabricated house, I should say, of some kind. And Ernest loved San Francisco. So he and my parents would take a train or drive to San Francisco very often, and there's some stories about their stays in San Francisco. So my mother said that Ernest, during this period of time, Ernest would, they would all be in San Francisco, and they had a favorite hotel, which I think was the St. Francis. And I can't confirm that at this moment because my mother's gone now, but I probably have it written down someplace. And during the day, he would go over to Oakland and work, and then he'd come back in the evening, they'd go to dinner and to a movie. They loved movies, all of them, and they went to a lot of movies together. And separately. And there's a picture of this book, which we have on sale back there. And I want to, before I say any more, I want to give away a couple of books of my father's, whose birthday is today, this week, this month. We have a birthday this month, only birthday this month. May I give you a gift? And I have one more to do that, and if you want to purchase this book, you're welcome to. We have a few of them on the back. Called The Magic of Love, and when it was written in a hardcover, it just went like wildfire. You know, it was just really fast. People loved the book. And so the other question I have was, who came the farthest besides us? We just came from Lakewood.
Elizabeth.
Where?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth?
Kiowa.
I don't know where Elizabeth is.
Kiowa.
What?
Kyla, she's from Denver, right?
Denver?
Yeah, Diego on I-25.
That's where they live.
Yeah, you got good.
Any place any further than Denver? I don't know. I don't know the geography, so you guys have to make your decision.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Reg was the head of the extension course. And what it was were these papers. There would be a letter from Ernest, and then later on it was Aunt Gussie, she would write the letters. There would be a whole lesson. In the first class, if you signed up for this extension course, you got a free textbook, which was worth about, I don't know, $2.50, something like that. Not $25, but $2.50, I think was the price. But they got it for free, it was included. And then in the back, there were questions and answers, and there was an essay by Ernest. And questions and answers were created by Reg Armour. And so we have redone those that whole set of extension courses. There's 48 of them. And what they would do is Reg would mail out one lesson. Then the people would learn the lesson, answer the questions, and mail back the questions with the answers to Reg. He would write them answers or correct them, and then he would, oh, thank you. And then he would send them the next week's. So that, went on for 48 weeks. And so we had people learning science of mind all over the world, including military men who were, and they were men at that time, I think. Anyway, and then, so anyway, the archives has put those back together and republished them. Now, at one time, they took the essays out of, let's see, how do I say this? The essays, they separated the essays from the rest of the class and created the book, Living the Science of Mind. And then the class, the rest of the things they put in these 6 volumes. Those have been out of print for a long, long time. So we have, the archives has put them back together and created the whole set. And so, yeah, it's wonderful. The other thing that we've done is I went in and read all the minutes of both organizations, because this book is the history of the religious science movement, and not just, United Church or International, either one. So I went in and read all the minutes and created this first part. And this first part is through Ernest Holmes' life. The second part, which is at the editor's, begins with Ernest Holmes' death, and then what happened through the church, the movement from that time on. Quite, different. All right. I have this book here. This was one of 6 books that Reg wrote, a couple of them by Ernest Holmes. This is no longer in print, however, I do have it as an ebook on the website, so on the archives website. So when you are back there at the bookstore, at the book table, I encourage you to take a pamphlet, and it tells you all about the archives. This pamphlet is about First Circle, and we encourage practitioners actually to join First Circle. And that's only $10 a month, or $125 for the year, and that supports the archives 100%. And when you want to donate 100, 500, whatever you want to donate, join Friends of Ernest. That's another program we have to raise funds. That's not a tornado thing, is it?
No.
Is that too nice? But I have something here I would like to read. When I was reading these minutes of the minutes of the religious science movement, I was really amazed. I was amazed that there was these 7 men, and they got together and they said, Ernest, you really need to create an organization. Do I have another 5 minutes or so? Okay. And to create this organization. And you need to have an organization. Ernest didn't want an organization. He just wanted to go and speak and teach science and mind principles as he had created them. And they're universal principles, so none of them were new. He got them someplace, but he put them together to create the lessons that we learn so that we can have better lives. And but these people, these 7 men, they, Ernest had to be on board. But all he said, he wanted to teach. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. And when the board members, they would tell him what they wanted him to do. Like with Robinson, like I said, when he went to be on that rally, then they said, no, we don't want you to be a part of that. Well, guess he had to mind them. So, but when they wanted him to be on the board, he said, my job is to deliver the water of life, to keep it flowing. Your task is to post the signs showing people where to find it. And that is the job of the board and the minister. Okay, Ernest wanted to teach. He did not want to be involved with the business or any of that part of it. And now, I would like to open it up to any questions that I might be able to answer. If I can't answer them, I'll let you know. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to hear a little more about when you were a child and you first met him, and did you get any of his teachings and how you feel about it?
Not really. One kid at 8 years old really is impressed with meeting someone that you don't even know that they're well known, or you should remember that they're well known. When we were young, of course, my mom and dad would take, my dad would be on the platform, and my mother always sat in this would be in one of the theaters, Belmont, Uptown, or the Wiltern, are the ones that I remember. And that Hazel always sat in the balcony, so my mother always sat in the balcony, and she would take us up there. And I distinctly remember, seeing Ernest up there on the platform and hearing him, not paying a bit of attention because I'd be sitting on the floor drawing pictures. Okay, and we didn't have Sunday school at that time. And then I guess there was some Sunday school later, but the Sunday school would be at the Institute building, not there at the theater. I remember smelling the popcorn, and they had to move from the Wiltern Theater one time because they decided that they wanted to show the movies earlier, and so we couldn't have 11 o'clock service. But everybody, you have 11 o'clock service, you're getting out at 12, and the movies are going to start at 1. They got that popcorn going before you get out of there. I love popcorn, but I remember that. Some of the things that I also remember have to do with when, during World War II, there was rationing on a lot of things, including meat. And so this particular summer, we went to the ranch in Northern California, near Santa Rosa. And we went up there every year. But this particular year, my uncle had a lamb prepared for us, killed for us, and hanging from the big oak tree in their backyard. And that's memorable. But then when we were ready to go home, they wrapped it into a white sheet and put it in the trunk of the car. Well, they couldn't close the trunk of the car, so here's this white body there with it. They tied it down the best they could, and they were just praying all the way home that police didn't stop and go, what is that in your trunk? Anyway, when we got home, then they had rented a freezer locker, which is what you could do, and you can still do it in some places. And then they called Ernest, and he cut it in quarters, and we gave Ernest and Hazel some, and we kept some, and in the freezer locker, and then gave other away. Then we had chickens when we lived up there, and every once in a while there'd be a shortage of a chicken. Oh no, that's not what. We would have chicken for dinner. And one time I remember asking my mother, You sure this is one of those chickens out in the back? Oh, no, it was not. But later years I found out, yes, and Ernest is the one that prepared it for us. I'm glad she didn't tell us then, because I wouldn't have liked it at all. You know, you don't like that picture of a live animal. Let me see, what else can I remember about the early years? Hey, is there another question? Maybe I'll think of something else. Any questions? Yes?
Where do you reside now?
Where do I live in Hayward, California. I have a daughter and that lives in Hayward, and I was living in Camarillo, Southern California, because that's where I was born and raised, and traveled a lot, but I always went back there. And my husband passed away in 2001. But I stayed on until my mother, we lived in Leisure Village, which is a senior area, but you own your own home, and then you have recreation building, pools, and all that kind of thing. My sister had a home there, I had a home there, my mother had a home there. And then finally my sister's husband died, my husband died, then several years later, her husband died, and then in 2010, my mother died. And when she finally died, then she was 95. And when she passed on, then my sister said, I'm going where it's cooler. She was going to Oregon. Now she lives in Bellingham, Washington. And my daughter didn't want me living down there alone. Although my friends are down there, but you know, no family. And so I moved up and bought a townhouse. Now I've sold that. And now they're building an apartment connected to my daughter's house, which is taken since last September. And I won't get in until next October, but they are making headway. So, and I'm living in a hotel at the moment because I have no place else to live, and all my stuff is in storage.
So yes. You mentioned quite a bit about the archives, so you are still pretty active with the archives here in
I am. I'm the person that my husband and I were asked if, well, we were in a retired ministers organization, and Bob Gale, who was the COO of United Church at the time, he said, you know, we have a room down in the basement that just has a bunch of stuff in it. We think that somebody should go in there and create an archives. And it was decided, since Richard and myself both knew Ernest Holmes and they, you know, in the church for so many years, and we volunteered to do that. So we came to Durango, to the university there, and learned something about archiving. And then we went home and started going through the stuff and organizing it. Then he passed on a couple of years later, and I think it was 90, let's see, I don't know, around 98, 99, something like that, and then we started that. And then they moved to Burbank into another small, dark room with no heat and no air conditioning. I lived there then for 5 years, several times a week, because it was quite a distance from where I lived. And I had a volunteer, and we got everything sorted in the computer as an inventory. Pretty well done. And we decided that since the home office in Golden had this big area of their building, about, I would guess it's close to a fourth of the building, around a fourth of the building, they wanted to rent it out. Nobody came to rent it, and so we decided that maybe it was time that we moved the archives there. I had asked the Heffernan Foundation if they would like to help me get the archives as a separate 501c3 from the organization. So we did that, and with the cooperation of RSI at the time and United at the time and the Heffernan Foundation, those two put in $30,000 each. Heffernan put in $50,000, and they've probably put in about $300,000 since then to create our own foundation. Okay, so it is a separate foundation, and only supported by individuals. So that's how the archives got started and where it is today. Other question? I think somebody here had a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
Ernest's background, where did his ancestors come from?
Well, I think his father came probably from Nova Scotia, and his mother, I don't know, they lived in Lincoln, Maine, or near Lincoln, Maine, so I would imagine in that area.
Okay, prior to that?
I have no idea. Yes?
Is your daughter involved in science and mind at all?
I would say that she practiced the principles, but she's never had any classwork or never gone to church or anything like that. Yes?
So you said that his brothers are also ministers, or are they ministers?
Two of them were ministers.
Of the science?
They were congregational ministers, but they're pretty well taught. They would be guest speakers at founders or before founders, you know, in churches. Mm-hmm.
They just were pretty from before that? Before they created? They brought up things or anything?
They were brought up Christian. They were very Christian. In fact, Ernest's middle name is from a very well-known minister. And being out in the rural areas of Maine, the ministers would travel to the different properties, different farms, you know, and every day they read the Bible at their kitchen table, the whole family. And then the minister would come every once in a while. But they had a minister by the name of Shirtliff, was his last name. And he wrote a hymn that is very well known, but I don't know the name of it, but it is well known. And that's how Ernest got his middle name, because his mother liked him. Yes, they were Christian, but they were not Firestone, Brim, whatever that is. If they went into Lincoln, to the church there, and heard the minister, there's a story in the book by Fenwick, Ernest Holmes' Life and Times, about them being, they would ride in a buckboard into Lincoln to go to church. And one time on the way home, the father pulled the horses over to the side of the road, and he turned around and he said, "Boys, I want you to understand, you are not from worms of the dirt, of the dust, of the dirt, and you were made in God's image." And they didn't like that kind of talk, and it was always uplifting, inspirational talks from them. Okay, I think that'll about do it. I invite you to participate in the archives in any way that you would like to. And Shirley Morgan, she lives in Lakewood and goes to Mile High, and she has some of the sets of the extension course. If you buy the whole course, we give you 20% off for all of them. Otherwise, each individual is $35 each. And then we have some of these of the Chronicles, those are $35. And we have my book and his company, and those are $15. So I appreciate you inviting me. I'm glad I could be here with you. Thank you.